It's June 4th, the day Donald Trump's 50% tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum go into effect. This is a big deal. Canada supplies 43% of U.S. aluminum imports and 22% of steel. Numerous American industries like auto manufacturing will suffer significant price hikes. Where will they find replacement steel and aluminum? Domestic U.S. producers have declined over the years. Building new plants or expanding old ones takes years, and the effect on the Canadian economy will almost certainly be disastrous, with thousands of layoffs in steel and aluminum mills, as well as their suppliers. Prime Minister Mark Carney has promised federal government support, such as loan guarantees and helping find new markets. But the companies and their workers will still feel considerable pain until the industries adjust to the new realities. I interviewed Peter Warrian, a distinguished research fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, about the tariff increases. He agrees that they're a standard Trump move to pressure the other side during trade negotiations. After all, Trump did the same thing during his first presidency, and he's following the same playbook this time around. But, Warrian warns, uncertainty about future American policy and the United States' fitness as a trading partner may cause the most damage in the medium to long term. Welcome to the interview, Peter.
Thank you.
Okay, so President Donald Trump has been threatening these tariffs on aluminum and steel production in Canada. He's doubled them from 25 to 50% as of today. Give us an overview of how that's going to affect the Canadian industries, please.
Well, first of all, it's important. He's done it before. I mean, in his first term, he did this, and it led to the renegotiation of the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement. And that's where these things should be dealt with. And even at the time, he declared this as the greatest trade agreement in history. Well, that went away. So, what is he doing? First of all, I think this current thing is a negotiation ploy. It's his style of negotiation. You read the book, put people off balance, threaten them, blah, 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 because it maximizes your personal negotiating thing. That's not how mature governments and nations should deal with one another, but it's real. I mean, in the sense that all this stuff, yes, it's a negotiating tactic, except out there are real companies, there's workers, there's families and communities where this has real effects. So it's, in one sense, you can say that this is sort of a negotiation game, but it's one with real issues and real consequences. So this is important. But you start off with, what's he doing? He's playing a game with us, a serious game.
Now, I've talked to American business executives who actually like this style. They say, well, Trump gets in and he shakes things up and gets people on edge, and then he gets into negotiations and he negotiates a better deal. But he really doesn't negotiate a better deal, does he? I mean, the CUSMA, the renegotiated deal from 2019 I mean, it wasn't that much of a radical difference, was it?
Right. But when people say that, there's two things. It creates and contributes more to this level of uncertainty across the whole economy. If you are serious about building factories or steel mills or whatever, these are multi-billion-dollar 3 to 5 year propositions. So you can politically speculate about midterm elections, but it affects decisions now. Secondly, just take the 50% tariff. The CEO of Algoma Steel, Mike Garcia, who's a very, very solid guy. He said, to make a 50% tariff work, you would have to have a steel price of $2,000 a ton. It's currently 900. Well, there's your inflation. Just for openers. And second, people understand is shutting down a steel mill is not like turning your vacuum cleaner on and off. It takes these are large, dangerous uh, worker safety, environmental things. It takes um, some weeks, if not a couple of months, to properly shut a steel mill down. So I would say, one, we do have the tariffs, and he's applying them to others as well. Um, but um, uh, we are probably weeks away from thousands of layoffs. Ironically, the first case of that was 10 days ago in the US steel industry, Cleveland Cliffs, Cleveland Cliffs. They laid off the layoff of 2,000 American workers because with the 25% tariff, they own Stelco in Hamilton. They couldn't bring it in and make a profit. Similarly, they couldn't bring in slabs from Brazil. So ironically, the first layoffs are in America.
Well, every economist I've talked to agrees that this is irrational, makes no sense. There's no strategy here. Well, there's a very clumsy, grade 10 civics understanding of the economy. Fair enough. What about the implications for Canadian industries and supply chains? Uh, can we pivot to other markets? Are there strategies to use more aluminum and steel domestically for the domestic market?
Well, the first of all, everybody knows the story of autos, cars, and steel, and we've spent, you know, 40 years or 35 years integrating the North American auto industry. It can't function without the flow. And you can produce a slab of steel or a sheet of steel, coil of steel in Hamilton at Stelco. Before it lands in the car as an auto part, it may go back and forth across the border 4 or 5 times. So where are you going to apply the tariff? Just for openers, right? Secondly, well, everybody knows the auto story. Things like the internet are important, but this is still an economy of stuff. And of the stuff people buy, 84% of it has steel in it. Your house, your refrigerator, your iPhone has steel in it. So this is a major impact on your manufacturing of goods. Services are important, but we have an economy of goods. So it has these ripple effects. The biggest one is automotive, but it's all these others as well. Now, if we look longer term, what Mr. Carney is talking about defense, particularly in the north, um, pipelines, hydro lines, housing, those all are steel intensive. So midterm, the possibility of growing the steel market in Canada are pretty good if that's the direction we're going in. But as Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. But is how we get there and manage this. So maybe they'll negotiate a last minute thing. You've heard this taco thing. Um, these tariffs will cause the shutdown of important parts of American manufacturing, not just automotive. And then you've heard the taco phrase, uh, Trump will chicken out and change it then. Maybe that'll happen. But we are a matter of weeks from major layoffs.
Does the uncertainty here, because investors and companies are looking ahead to the future and saying, "Well, look, if he did it he's done it a number of times already. He's promised to do it more in the future. We just can't trust him anymore. Can't trust the American system." Does this, even if it's just a negotiating ploy, lead to permanent changes in industries and supply chains?
Well, I think that's partly what Carney is talking about. But from what I understand, you particularly talk about energy issues. Well, the steel industry is in the middle of an energy transition, getting rid of these old blast furnaces and get new electric innovators. So you drastically reduce the carbon. Good. The government of Canada and Ontario have come in with money on that, but most of the money comes from the companies. And if they can't sell stuff, they got no revenues. So that the environmental part of this in terms of longer impacts is one of that I'm really concerned about. And finally, just globally, China produces half the steel industry and steel in the world. And because they've had problems in their economy, they have dumped an unprecedented amount of steel on the market. So around the world, not yet in Canada, but I think we're going to get there. There's going to be looking at dumped steel at prices that nobody can manage. It's not China, it is Vietnam, It's partly Korea, Turkey, um, uh, because even if a ton of steel doesn't show up in Hamilton Harbor, the prices get suppressed. So we can't operate. We can't do the environmental stuff, all of the environment and energy transition we all want. So those are the bigger, longer term effects.
Uh, I've interviewed, excuse me, I've interviewed experts who argue that in fact what Trump is doing is playing right into China's hands, from a medium to long-term perspective and a geopolitical perspective. What's your take on that?
Well, two things. Number one is that China ships almost no steel into the United States. What they do is they sell steel slabs and sheets to Vietnam and Korea, and they ship it in. So that's an issue. But also, um, this Mr. Trump is good at telling half truths. He's even better at telling untruths. But the half truth is there's a problem in global steel of overcapacity. Goldman Sachs came out with a report yesterday. There's 55 million tons. It may grow next year to 250 million tons. And most of that is in Asia and China, not just China, but almost all of it. So you have to downsize that. They've started, but the small amounts. So if we have an excess capacity globally of 250 million tons, showing my age, back in the 70s and 80s, it took the Americans 16 years to reduce uh, about 20 million tons. It took the Europeans 23 years to reduce 20 million tons. How do you adjust 250 million tons? This is a major challenge.
Uh, it, no, I've interviewed a number of experts on the Chinese auto industry and the idea that the Chinese support a number of auto manufacturers who then compete vigorously, and some of them fail, and others become lean and mean and scale up. And is China doing the same kind of thing with steel and aluminum, where they want to scale up and take market share away from North America, Europe, other countries?
Well, they certainly want to do that, and they have been. So Mr. Musk has created his own problems in Tesla. So, but BYD, the biggest Chinese and biggest EV producer, they're expanding around the world. Um, but there you've got a different longer range issue. They do on their major models, Tesla and them, aluminum. Uh, let's don't want to take it down a rabbit hole, but mega casting, they take one big, it's almost like a skateboard. Here's the frame of the wheels. You replace 300 welded steel parts in the front end, the back end, and you drop the battery in between. But um, Megacat, that's all one thing. But problem is, if you have a minor fender blender, the whole car is a write-off because it's all one piece. So there's, again, midterm, there's a major steel versus aluminum. So we're going towards EV. The question is, what's the slope of the curve? But in that, we've got major materials competition between steel and aluminum. When I'm not consumed with these kinds of issues, that's the big one that I'm thinking about.
If that's the case, my understanding is that the cheap hydro that comes out Quebec generates gives its aluminum industry a major competitive advantage. Is it possible that the Canadian aluminum industry could pivot to new markets that, Brazil and Turkey and places like that, where BYD is setting up an EV factory, for example?
I think that's on their radar skin. But the other thing I would say is there are problems with aluminum, like the fender bender and the write-off of the car that drives the insurance companies crazy. Um, so steel in the 80s, it was steel versus plastic in the auto bodies. We'll see how steel responds. Um, but I've just come from Newfoundland, where iron ore is a big deal, and you've got Churchill Falls, you got the electric power and you've got the iron ore. So I think the pivot point is going to be actually producing iron, not just you make the steel from the iron, but so part of this could be aluminum on the EV, aluminum from Quebec versus iron ore from Labrador, Newfoundland and Labrador.
So it sounds like we've got a number of structural changes in various industries going on, and China, of course, emerging as well, it already is the major manufacturer and competitor, which seems like a very, very odd time to be having this kind of a dispute between Canada and the US and essentially hobbling any number of industries as a consequence.
Well, as I say, I go back to Mr. Trump and telling half truths. The question of manufacturing, we saw it originally around COVID, right, about a supply of medical materials, but now we're seeing it things like cars, uh, um, other strategic goods that you'd want to have. So globalization, if it only meant the Chinese have permanent manufacturing surplus with the rest of the world, that's not going to succeed. The world is changing for not just economic reasons, but geopolitical reasons. So the question is, are we going to have a different kind of a system? Yes, the trade system is going to change, but it won't be just American unilateralism driving it. I think the next moves are going to be with the Europeans and the Chinese. And then if the Americans don't want to play by international rules, we'll see what happens.
Peter, thank you very much for this. Really appreciate your insights.
All right, there's probably more than enough to talk about. Okay, thank you.